The year is 2004. The room smells of old paper and stale coffee. A young man in a cheap suit sits at a large oak desk. The desk does not belong to him. His name is David. He is a junior accountant. He is 26 years old. He has been tasked with an independent audit. Across from him sit Arthur and Sarah Jensen. They are in their late 50s. Their hands are calloused. Their faces are calm. To his right sits Bill Abernathy, the owner of the desk, the owner of the largest John Deere dealership in 3 counties. Bill is 75. He looks tired. He looks smaller than the photographs on his wall suggest. Photographs of him with governors, with senators, shaking hands, handing out trophies for Little League teams he sponsored for 50 years. David the accountant clears his throat. He adjusts his tie. He looks down at the final page of a 3-inch binder. A single number is circled in red ink. He says the number out loud. $11,472.81. The room goes silent. Utterly silent. The only sound is the hum of a fluorescent light overhead. Sarah Jensen closes her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Arthur does not move. He just watches Bill Abernathy. Bill stares at the number on the page, as if the ink itself is a betrayal. He looks at Arthur, a man he has known his entire life. A man whose father he called his best friend. A man he once told, with kindness in his heart, that he simply could not succeed, that he wasn't capable, that he needed to give up before he lost everything. This channel is for stories like that, stories about the people who were told no, the ones who were written off, the ones who were protected right into a corner, and then quietly, stubbornly, proved everyone wrong. If you believe those stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because what happened in that room was not the beginning. It was the end of a 30-year promise. A promise a man made to his wife in a cold barn. A promise that they would never again depend on the kindness of men who held all the keys. Let me take you back to March of 1974. Arthur Jensen was 25 years old, and he had just buried his father. The farm was 500 acres, mostly corn and soy, good black dirt that his grandfather had cleared with mules. But the farm was also in debt, deep in debt to the John Deere dealership in town. A new 4430 tractor, a 7700 combine, just 2 seasons old, planters, cultivators, discs, all green, all financed, all dependent on the signature of his father, a signature that was now gone. 2 weeks after the funeral, Arthur walked into Abernathy and Sons' implement. The bell on the door chimed. The place smelled of new tires and hydraulic fluid. Bill Abernathy came out from the back office himself. He put a heavy, kind hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Come on in, son. Let's have some coffee." Bill's office was a shrine to local success, his own. Plaques from Deere and Company for sales volume. Photos of his son, a lawyer in the city. A framed map of the county with pins in it. A pin for every farm that ran his equipment. Arthur's farm had 5 pins. Bill poured 2 mugs of thick black coffee. He didn't waste time. "Arthur, your dad was my friend, one of the best men I ever knew. And I feel a responsibility to you, to your mother." Arthur nodded. He just wanted to settle the accounts, to figure out the payment plan for the spring. Planting was 6 weeks away. Bill leaned forward. He folded his big, clean hands on the desk. The notes on the 4430 and the 7700 are substantial. "Your father and I had an understanding. based on his history, based on his yields. Arthur waited. He felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Bill continued, his voice soft, full of genuine concern. "Son, you've never run this operation on your own. It's a two-man job, at least. Your dad knew that. I know that. Farming isn't about strength. It's about capital. It's about managing risk. And right now, you are a very big risk." Arthur found his voice. It was quiet. "I can do the work, Bill. I've been doing it since I was 10. Bill smiled a sad, fatherly smile. "I know you can, son. I have no doubt about your work ethic. This isn't about that. This is business. The bank holds the paper on that equipment, and with your father gone, they're going to be looking at me. And I'm going to be looking at you. And I can't, in good conscience, extend that much credit to a 25-year-old boy, with no track record of his own." The words hung in the air. 25-year-old boy. It wasn't meant as an insult. That was the worst part. It was meant as a fact, a simple, unchangeable fact, like the weather. "So what are you saying?" Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. Bill sighed. He looked out the window at the lot full of shiny green machines. "I'm saying you need to scale back, dramatically. I've already talked to Frank Miller. He's interested in the north 300 acres. He'll pay a fair price. You sell that land. You pay off the combine, the tractor, all of it. You farm the remaining 200 with your dad's old 4020. No debt, no risk. You can make a living, a small living, but an honest one. It's the smart play, Arthur. It's the safe play. I'm not going to be the man who lets you lose the whole farm. I won't have that on my conscience." Arthur stood up. The coffee in his mug was untouched. He looked at the map on the wall, at the 5 green pins on his family's land. Bill was proposing he pull 3 of them out himself. He looked at Bill, a man his father had trusted completely, a pillar of the community, a man who was, in this moment, trying to protect him, trying to save him from himself. And in that kindness, Arthur felt an anger so cold and so deep it stunned him. It was an anger he couldn't fight, because it wasn't aimed at an enemy. It was aimed at a friend who had already decided he would fail. He walked out of the office. The bell on the door chimed again. This time it sounded like a funeral bell. He drove the 10 miles home in complete silence. He didn't turn on the radio. He just watched the bare March fields roll by. Fields he was being told to sell. He pulled into his driveway. Sarah was on the porch, waiting for him. She saw his face. She knew. She didn't ask what happened right away. She just let him walk into the house. Let him sit at the kitchen table, the same table his grandfather had built from an oak tree on the property. He sat there for a long time, staring at the worn grain of the wood. Finally, he told her, every word. The part about being a boy, the part about selling the North 300, the part about being a risk. When he finished, the silence in the kitchen was heavy. Sarah stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She walked to the old secretary desk in the living room. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound book, her grandfather's farm ledger. The first entry was from 1928, written in neat, cursive ink. She placed it on the table in front of Arthur. She opened it to a blank page. Her finger traced the empty columns: date, item, debit, credit. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear. He owns the notes on the machines. He doesn't own the dirt, and he doesn't own us. Arthur looked at the ledger. Then he looked at his wife. He saw no fear in her, only resolve. "What do we do?" he asked. She slid a pen across the table. "First," she said, "we make a list of everything we own outright. Not what the bank owns, not what Mr. Abernathy owns, what we own." They started the list. The house, the barns, the 500 acres of land, mortgaged but in their name. One old pickup truck, a '65 Ford. And in the back of the machine shed, under a dusty tarp, his father's old John Deere 4020, retired 5 years ago. And her father's even older Alice Chalmers WD-45. The list was short. It was terrifyingly short. But it was theirs. The next morning, Arthur drove back to town. Not to the Deere dealership, but to the bank. He met with the loan officer, a man named Peterson. Peterson was nervous. He'd already had a call from Bill Abernathy. Arthur made him an offer. He would surrender the 4430 tractor. He would surrender the 7,700 combine, and every other piece of green equipment with a lien on it. In exchange, the bank would consider the notes paid, and release the secondary lien they held on his land. Peterson was reluctant. The equipment was used. It would have to go to auction. They might not get what was owed. Arthur didn't bargain. He just said, "This is the only offer. If you refuse, I'll declare bankruptcy. Then you'll get the equipment and a long court battle. And you won't get a dime from me for 10 years. Or you take the deal, and I keep farming, and I keep my account at your bank." It was a bluff, a huge one. But he said it with a flat, calm certainty that scared Peterson more than the numbers. Peterson made a phone call. He came back 10 minutes later. He agreed. 2 days later, a lowboy trailer from Abernathy and Sons came out to the farm. The driver wouldn't look Arthur in the eye. They loaded up the big green tractor. They loaded up the massive green combine. Machine by machine, they stripped the farm of its modern heart. Arthur and Sarah stood on the porch and watched it all go. It felt like watching your own funeral. When the last truck pulled away, the yard felt empty, hollowed out. Sarah put her hand on his arm. "Now," she said, "now we begin." Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by someone who thought they were helping you. Someone who genuinely believed they were saving you from your own ambition. There's a unique pain in that. A quiet devastation that can't be fought with anger. It can only be disproven. Over decades. If you know that feeling, let me know in the comments. Because what Arthur and Sarah did next was not a response. It was a declaration of independence, written in grease and steel and sweat. That winter was the coldest in a decade. The snow drifted up against the barn doors. Inside, under a single bare light bulb, Arthur went to work. He and Sarah had pulled the tarp off the old Alice Chalmers WD-45. It hadn't run in 10 years. The tires were cracked and flat. Mice had chewed through the wiring. The engine was seized. It was orange and rusted. A relic. A piece of junk to anyone else. To Arthur, it was all he had. He started with the engine. He didn't have the money for a mechanic, so he bought a service manual from the local library's book sale for $0.25. He read it every night at the kitchen table. Sarah would read alongside him, learning with him. He pulled the engine apart, piece by piece, laying each bolt, each gasket, each piston on a clean cloth on the concrete floor. He found the problem. 2 cylinders were filled with rust from a leaky exhaust. The block was probably cracked. It was a fatal diagnosis. He went to the scrapyard. He spent days walking through rows of dead tractors, looking for another engine. He found one in a rusted-out D17, The owner wanted $200 for it. Arthur had $150. He offered the man the scrap price for the old seized engine, plus the $150. The man agreed. It took him a week to get the new engine in. Working with a chain hoist and pry bars, his knuckles were always bloody. His hands were stained black with grease that wouldn't wash out. Sarah would bring him coffee and sandwiches. She never asked if he could do it. She only asked what he needed next. He rewired the whole tractor using a kit he bought from a catalog. He patched the tires himself. In late February, he was ready. He filled the tank with gas. He hooked up the battery. He climbed into the cold steel seat. He pulled the choke. He hit the starter. The engine turned. It coughed. It sputtered black smoke. And then it caught. A loud rumbling roar that filled the barn and echoed across the frozen fields. It was the sound of hope, the sound of defiance. He hadn't just fixed a tractor, he had taken back a piece of his own future. But one old small tractor couldn't farm 500 acres. He needed a planter, he needed a cultivator. He went to farm auctions, places where dreams went to die. He watched men his father's age bid on equipment from farms that had gone under. He never bid on the big new items. He waited for the old stuff in the back row. The broken, the rusted, the forgotten. He bought an old 4-row John Deere planter with busted seed boxes for $50. He took it home and fabricated new boxes out of sheet metal in his workshop. He bought a cultivator with bent tines for $20. He heated the tines with a torch and straightened them with a sledgehammer on his anvil. He was building an arsenal of antiques, a fleet of ghosts. His neighbors noticed. They saw the old orange tractor pulling the cobbled-together planter. They talked at the co-op, at the diner. He's lost his mind. Can't farm that much land with that junk. Bill Abernathy was right about the boy. He's going to lose the whole place. It's a damn shame. The talk got back to Arthur. It always does in a small town. He ignored it. He just worked. From sunup to sundown, he was in the fields. After sundown, he was in the barn, fixing what broke that day. Because something always broke. The clutch on the Alice gave out in the middle of planting. He spent all night pulling the tractor in two in his shop to replace it. He was back in the field the next morning. The welds on his cultivator snapped. He dragged it back to the barn and re-welded it stronger than before. He wasn't just farming. He was waging a one-man war against entropy, against doubt. Bill Abernathy would drive by the Jensen farm on his way home from the dealership. He'd slow his Lincoln down. He'd see the little orange tractor crawling across the vast fields. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a deep, profound pity. He saw a young man working himself to death out of pure stubbornness. He was proving himself right, and it made him feel terrible. He had tried to help. He had offered the only sensible path, and the boy had refused. He shook his head and drove on. Convinced he was watching the slow, painful end of a family legacy. But he was wrong. Arthur got the crops in. Late, but in. He cultivated them with his straightened tines. He prayed for rain, and the rain came. That fall, he had a problem. A good problem. He had a decent crop of corn, but he had no combine. He'd surrendered the 7700. He couldn't afford to hire a custom harvester. That would have cost thousands. So he went back to the auctions. He found an old Massey Harris 300 combine, a pole-type model from the 1950s. It was small. It was slow. It was half-rotted. He paid $300 for it. He spent a month getting it running. Harvest was a slow, grueling process. The new combines on the neighboring farms could harvest 100 acres in a day. Arthur's little Massey could do maybe 15, if it didn't break down, which it did, every day. But he kept at it. He harvested every last acre. His yields weren't great. They were below the county average. But he had a crop. And more importantly, he had almost no expenses. His seed and fertilizer were his only major costs. He had no equipment payments, no interest eating away at his margins. That first year, after he sold the grain, he and Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the ledger. She did the math. Total income, total expenses, net profit, $22,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was theirs, every penny of it, earned with their hands, with their stubbornness. Sarah wrote the number in the final column of the ledger. Then she looked at Arthur, and she smiled. "It's enough," she said. "The dirt is enough." That became their mantra through all the years that followed. The dirt is enough. Let me tell you about the next 30 years, because this is where the story becomes bigger than one man and his tractor. It becomes a story about a different way of thinking. 1975. He nets $28,000. He doesn't buy a new tractor. He buys a better welder. Cash. 1976. A drought year. His neighbors with huge payments struggle. Some sell off cattle to make their notes. Arthur's crop is small, but he has no notes to make. He breaks even. He survives. 1978. He has a good year. $35,000 in profit. He hears the 80 acres bordering his eastern fence is for sale. An old widow is selling it. He goes to see her. He makes an offer. $70,000. Cash. The neighbors are stunned. How did he get that kind of money? They assumed he was broke. They didn't understand the math, the contrast math. Their new combine cost $200,000, financed over 7 years. Their payment was $40,000 a year. Arthur's combine cost $300 and a month of his time. His payment was $0. They were farming for the bank and John Deere. Arthur was farming for himself. 1980. The farm crisis hits. Interest rates skyrocket to 18%. Farmers who were leveraged to the hilt are wiped out. Auction notices appear in the paper like obituaries. Bill Abernathy's dealership is full of repossessed equipment. He has to lay off 2 mechanics. Arthur has no debt. The crisis doesn't touch him. He buys another 120 acres from a bankrupt neighbor. He pays the man's asking price, $140,000. Cash. He feels no joy in it. He knows he is buying another man's dream, but he also knows it is the only way to survive, to grow, to prove that man in the Lincoln wrong. Bill Abernathy saw the sale in the county records. He couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense. The boy was supposed to be failing. Instead, he was buying land for cash. It was an anomaly, a fluke. It had to be. By 1985, Arthur Jensen farmed 700 acres. He still used old equipment, but now he had a fleet of it. 3 Allis-Chalmers tractors, 2 Farmall tractors. He had a bigger, newer combine, a Gleaner F2 from the late 70s. He'd bought it at an auction for $5,000, cash. His machine shed was a museum of forgotten brands. Orange, red, silver, but no green. Not a single piece of new John Deere green. His son Michael was born in 1982. He grew up in the seat of an old Allis-Chalmers. He learned to weld before he learned to drive a car. He understood the philosophy of the farm. You don't buy what you can fix. You don't finance what you can pay for. You don't depend on anyone who isn't standing in your own yard. By the 1990s, Arthur was one of the most successful farmers in the county. He farmed over 1,500 acres, all of it paid for, cash. He was quiet about it. He never drove a new truck. He and Sarah still lived in the same small farmhouse, but the numbers at the co-op didn't lie. His yields were now consistently above the county average. His input costs were the lowest of anyone. He had become a quiet legend, the man who did it his own way, with junk. Bill Abernathy was getting older. His son, the lawyer, had no interest in the dealership. Bill saw Arthur at the diner sometimes. He would nod. Arthur would nod back. They never spoke of that day in 1974, but it was always there, a ghost in the room, a quiet, unsettled debt of dignity. Bill had finally come to respect Arthur. He saw him as a peer, a success story, and he wanted his business. It became an obsession for him, to get a piece of green equipment back on the Jensen farm. It would be a symbol, a validation that his way was still the right way. In 2003, he made his move. He drove out to the farm, the first time he had been there in 30 years. He found Arthur in the shop, rebuilding a transmission. He made his pitch. A brand new John Deere 9660 combine, state-of-the-art, GPS steering, yield monitors. It could do in one day what it took Arthur a week to do. He offered it to Arthur at his cost. An incredible deal. No money down. 0% financing for 5 years. "Arthur, you've earned it," Bill said. "You've proven you can do it the hard way. Now let the machine do the work." Arthur was tempted. He was 54 years old. His body ached. Harvest was getting harder every year. The thought of sitting in a quiet, air-conditioned cab, it was seductive. He told Bill he would think about it. He and Sarah talked about it for weeks. It went against everything they had built, but it was a tool, a very effective tool. Finally, Arthur agreed. He went to the dealership and signed the preliminary paperwork. He didn't sign the main financing agreement, but he did sign the service contract, a standard part of the deal. It enrolled him in their preventative maintenance program, scheduled inspections, software updates. It seemed reasonable. He brought the papers home and put them on the kitchen table. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She got up and went to the kitchen. She saw the green folder. Something bothered her. For 30 years, she had been the bookkeeper, the guardian of the ledger. She had paid every bill, tracked every expense. They still had a small parts account at Abernathy's, for the old 4020, for oil filters, small things. She got out her files, boxes of old invoices. She started going through them, year by year. She was looking for something she couldn't name, a feeling, an instinct, and then she found it. An invoice from 1998, a charge for 2 oil filters, and underneath it, a line item. Shop supply and environmental fee, $15. She remembered asking Arthur about it. He'd said it was just something they charged now. She kept digging. An invoice from 2001, parts for the 4020's water pump, and another line item. Preventative diagnostic check, $50. But they hadn't asked for a diagnostic check. They had just bought the parts over the counter. Her blood ran cold. She stayed up all night. With a calculator and a notepad, she went through 12 years of invoices. She found dozens of them, small charges, always under $100. Technician consultation fee, software royalty surcharge, emergency parts sourcing premium, charges for services never requested, for software on a tractor that had none, for emergencies that never happened. They were so small you'd never notice them one by one. A rounding error, the cost of doing business. But added up, over 12 years, it was not a rounding error. It was a system. A quiet, systematic skimming. a tax on trust. The next morning, she showed Arthur. He looked at the list of charges. He looked at the total. He didn't get angry. A deep, weary calm settled over him. The same feeling he'd had in that office 30 years ago. The feeling of being underestimated, of being treated like someone who wouldn't notice. Sarah picked up the phone. She didn't call Bill Abernathy. She called his son, the lawyer. She told him she had found discrepancies in their billing. She told him the total. She told him they would be hiring an independent auditor. And then she said a sentence that made the lawyer go silent. "We can do this quietly, or we can do it with the state attorney general's office. The choice is yours." 2 weeks later, they were all sitting in Bill Abernathy's office with David, the young accountant, and David read the number, $11,472.81, the final audited total of the fake charges. Bill Abernathy just sat there, stunned. He looked at his own bookkeeper, a woman who had worked for him for 40 years. She wouldn't meet his eye. "It was just standard practice, Bill. Everyone does it. A little extra on every ticket. It adds up." Bill looked back at Arthur. His face was pale. He saw not just the theft, he saw the profound disrespect it represented. The assumption that Arthur was just a simple farmer who wouldn't check the details, the same assumption he had made 30 years ago, that Arthur wasn't smart enough, wasn't capable enough, wasn't enough. He finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Arthur, your father, he trusted me with everything." Arthur leaned forward. He spoke quietly, but his words filled the room. "My father trusted everyone, Bill. That's what you counted on then, and it's what your business has been counting on ever since." There was nothing else to say. The quiet devastation in that sentence was total. It wasn't just about the money. It was about a lifetime of being misjudged by a man who claimed to be a friend. Abernathy and Sons cut them a check that day for the full amount. Arthur and Sarah walked out of the dealership. The bell on the door chimed. They never went back. The new John Deere combine was never delivered. The contract was canceled. The story doesn't end there, because a true legacy isn't about winning a fight. It's about what you build afterward. Arthur and Sarah took that check for $11,400, and they didn't put it in their own account. They drove to the local community college. They endowed a new scholarship, the Jensen Family Scholarship for Agricultural Mechanics. It was for any young person who wanted to learn to be a mechanic, to learn to fix their own machines, so they would never have to depend on the mercy or the honesty of a dealership. The first recipient was a young woman from a small farm a few towns over. Arthur and Sarah attended the awards ceremony. They sat in the back. They watched her accept the scholarship, and they saw the future. A future where people had the knowledge to be free. Bill Abernathy retired a year later. He sold the dealership to a large corporate chain. The name Abernathy and Sons came off the building. He lives a quiet life now. Sometimes he sees Arthur in town. He still nods. But now there is something else in his eyes. Not pity, not respect. Something that looks a lot like shame. The witness who watches from a distance. That is its own kind of justice. Today, the Jensen farm is over 2,000 acres. Michael, Arthur's son, runs most of the day-to-day operations. He has a degree in agronomy. He uses soil science and data. but he still runs a fleet of old, meticulously maintained tractors. Red ones, orange ones. He teaches his own children how to change the oil, how to read a wiring diagram, how to weld a broken piece of steel. And on the desk in the farmhouse, there is still that old leather ledger. Sarah still makes entries in it, in the same neat, cursive hand. It is more than a book of numbers. It is a physical artifact of their independence, a testament to a promise made at a kitchen table, that the dirt is enough, that they are enough. The story of Arthur and Sarah Jensen is a quiet one. It didn't make any headlines. There were no parades. But it is a story about the most dangerous kind of limitation, the one that is imposed on you by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. Certainty about another person's capabilities, delivered with kindness. It is more damaging than outright hostility, because it cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven. With decades of work, with cold mornings in a barn, with bloody knuckles and stubborn resolve. Right now, somewhere in the world, a young person is sitting in an office, and a kind, well-meaning person is telling them what they cannot do, is explaining to them the safe path, is protecting them from their own dreams. This story is for them. The proof that the map other people draw for you is not the only territory that exists. If this story means something to you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this that need to be told. Drop a comment and tell us about a time you had to prove someone wrong. And share this video with one person who needs to be reminded that they are the ones who hold the pen, and they get to write the final number in their own ledger.